Hello and welcome. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Steve Thayer, and this is Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and mental health. My co-host is Dr. Reid Robison. Reid is a psychiatrist and a seasoned psychedelic researcher and clinician. In today's episode, Reid and I discuss how to integrate a psychedelic experience. We talk about the transformative potential of psychedelic experiences in and of themselves, how to make the changes prompted by psychedelics stick in your day-to-day life, and what it means to integrate a psychedelic experience in your day-to-day life. We cover these topics and a few others. Please enjoy. All right, Reid, we're at it again. Today, I thought we could talk about integration. So, Reid, you're a psychiatrist. I'm a psychologist. People come to us because they want help changing, right? They're dissatisfied with something about themselves. They're unhappy, and they don't want to be unhappy anymore. And it's the same thing that draws people, I think, to psychedelics and psychedelic medicine, especially the appeal that these powerful, non-ordinary states of consciousness can change their mind. Right? Like Michael Pollan was audacious enough to entitle his book, How to Change Your Mind.
It worked. Yeah. It sold a lot of copies.
Sold a lot of copies. Because, I mean, who doesn't want to change some things about themselves? There are, I suppose, a few of us who are enlightened and totally satisfied with themselves. But people take these substances either in a recreational context, personal context, therapeutic context, and they're hoping that the experience will cause some kind of seismic tectonic change. Sometimes it does for some people, but in my experience working with ketamine as a ketamine-assisted psychotherapist, the experience itself can be life-changing, but the change, I think, really happens in the integration afterward. So I thought we could talk about what it means to integrate, what are the tasks of integration, how do we as clinicians help people integrate psychedelic experiences, etc.
Yeah, I love that topic because I think it is a misconception that psychedelic medicines will just fix us, save us. But the true magic of psychedelic therapy happens in the therapy part, and the medicine is the tool, the portal, opens the door to this transformation, creates a window of opportunity, but you've still got to do the work.
Right. The Zen, is it a Zen saying, like, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
Yeah, I love that saying. Or how Jack Kornfield puts it in one of his book titles is, after ecstasy, the laundry. You know, you've still got to go do regular stuff. But one thing you mentioned was really interesting of the transformative potential of a psychedelic experience is there and real. And in the psilocybin studies out of Hopkins and even like the Good Friday experiment out of Harvard, those were for most one of the more powerful and profound experiences of the participant's life. But it still doesn't mean they were changed forever. It's interesting to me that early on, your first psychedelic experiences can be earth-shattering, extremely profound, and shake things up for you even more than, say, your 10th or your 100th psychedelic experience. Not always, but often.
Yeah, profound, meaningful, and they become these pivot points for some people in their life. Like, first time I took mushrooms, and now all I do is hug trees and eat plants. And for some people that happens. And you see this in psychedelic entrepreneurship. Like, a lot of the people who are driving the psychedelic renaissance from an entrepreneurship, I think, position are people whose lives were changed by their own experiences with psychedelics. So you do see people making changes. But, when we talk about what psychedelics do for a brain, we use these metaphors that make it sound like the medicines just totally rewire your brain. The ski slope metaphor is one we use often. It's like a fresh coat of powder in your mind, and now you have options where before you only had the groomed trails. And to somebody who feels totally stuck in who they are, that is so appealing. That I'm going to be able to have this wacky trip and then I won't have the problems that I have anymore. I just don't think that's exactly what psychedelics do. I think instead it's more what you're talking about. It provides this index experience. Like, holy cow, that was wild. I see myself in the world in a different way for a moment. And then I'm back to chopping wood and carrying water. I almost said chopping water and carrying.
You could do that too.
We could do that too.
Yeah.
And so now what do? I have an opportunity, because of the way I've seen myself in the world differently, to lay down new patterns.
Yeah.
But the laying down of new patterns still requires work. Like, you are still there after the psychedelic experience, whatever constitutes you. And so if you want to make changes, you got to do the work.
Yeah, so I think in that way, the ski slope metaphor applies, in that you get this reset, this fresh coat of powder, or this new perspective, fresh new energy to do something with. But if you don't do anything with it, that's going to snap back. Your life will snap back into place like a rubber band, just how it was in general, or for the most part. Whereas if you use that window of opportunity to change the way you show up in the world, and start to work on new patterns, then over time, those new pathways are laid down in a conscious, intentional way.
Right. So your psychedelic experience becomes a catalyst for change, as
Yeah.
opposed to the thing that does the changing for you.
Yeah, and most of the work is done in the integration.
Right.
In the meditation world, there's this concept of practicing in the gaps, or I use that in yoga practice sometimes. Is, you get on your yoga mat or your meditation cushion to work on things and have a dedicated practice, but where the magic really meets the road is when you're out there in the world and interacting with people. Does it really translate into you being less triggered and reactive into unhealthy anger? Or how does it translate into the way you show up when you're standing in a busy grocery store line? Are you able to find your center, to breathe, to relax, to practice in that gap?
Exactly. Exactly. You know what that makes me think of? This phenomenon where people become chasers of the non-ordinary experience.
Yeah.
And they go from one Tony Robbins event to the next, or from one meditation retreat to the next. Or ayahuasca ceremony to the next. And they have these ecstatic, amazing, meaningful, profound experiences at each of these events. But the way, as you're describing, they're not really showing up in their life in this way. So how do we help people get there? That's the big question. As clinicians, how do we help people facilitate this process that we're calling integration?
Yeah, and before we get into that, just one little story personally to show how that plays out. Having gone to plenty of therapeutic ayahuasca retreats and experienced the medicine myself, in addition to helping others, I do come out of those settings with a fresh energy, like a reboot, or I bounce out of bed the next day. I have this more open heart. I have a newfound kind of drive and motivation and kind of centered Zen presence, it feels like. But if I don't turn that into new habits, over the coming days, weeks, it starts to trickle away. I've watched it unfold time and time again with great interest, because we have these conversations about it. But to experience it like that, I know for me, it's a real phenomenon. That's how it works. A window of opportunity, use it or lose it.
Yeah, it's like the fresh coat of powder will melt eventually, and what you have under there are the old ruts. So if you don't do something while that fresh coat's there to carve new pathways, you're inevitably going to fall back into the old ruts.
Yeah, and so what do we do is with our clients in our own lives is, just like you said, an intention going into the journey. You have an intention or a conscious plan for how to integrate these profound experiences into your day-to-day life.
Yeah, setting up, I think, expectations as part of that intention creating process is really important. Because if we're telling people, hey, the ketamine's going to take all your problems away. Of course, we would never say something like that. But somebody might come in with maybe even a hidden expectation or a hope that, like, I've tried all these drugs, I've tried therapy, I've heard this horse tranquilizer is going to save my life. So helping educate them, like, okay, this is going to do some of the things we've described. But ultimately, you'll get out what you put into it.
Yeah.
And so let's work on your intention going in. What problem are you hoping to explore? So intention setting is really, I guess we could call it the first step of the integration process, is the intention setting process.
Yeah, I agree. I believe that as well, that integration starts the minute a client walks in the door. Mm-hmm. You're starting with the intention, with the whole treatment plan, with the time and space you allow before and after the experience to prepare, to make it special, and to give yourself the time needed to process and work on the new things you want to bring into your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's just riff on some of the integration activities and strategies that we tend to use and suggest to our clients. So one that comes to mind is looking for the signature. Well, let's stick with ketamine for a minute. That's what we use here in clinic. Looking for the ketamine signature in your day-to-day life. So, a lot of folks who have used ketamine therapeutically note that they feel, they experience a relationship to their self that was, up until that point, unknown to them. I'm remembering a client with an eating disorder who said after a ketamine experience, I loved my body for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
So, she admitted that several days later, that old self, that old part came online. She was less in love with her body. But she remembered what that felt like, to relate to her body with love. And so that's what I mean by look for ketamine, that signature of the ketamine self day to day. Like, okay, I'm noticing that I feel disgust when I look at my body in the mirror. However, I remember that while under the influence, I loved my body. Can I find my way back there? I've described it before as dropping a breadcrumb at that place, and then on your way out, leaving the trail so that you can find your way back.
Yeah, I like that. And sometimes we'll tell people to have a special playlist of music for their journey, and then keep it special or sacred that you can revisit in that practice of returning to that place of kind of self-love or wholeness in your integration plan. Because I think it's also important to point out that psychedelics are a tool to give you access to that truer self, or that state of kind of oneness, or that plane of consciousness, but it's not the only way there. Mm-hmm. And you can revisit that through contemplative practices and through following these breadcrumbs, like you mentioned.
Right. Yeah. Which is another really important point. Like, there are practices that you can use to follow the breadcrumbs. Contemplative practices are one. You mentioned meditation earlier. You know a lot about meditation, Reid. Is there a particular style or type of meditation, do you think, that lends itself really well to this kind of work?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I think it's an important one, is how does one begin in a meditation practice? And I like to, sure, there are excellent books, courses, apps that you can use, but I like to simplify it as much as possible and just say that a meditation practice consisting of sitting with yourself in contemplation and breathing, in awareness for 3 to 5 minutes every morning and night is a very strong practice. Mm-hmm. And it's more than most people allow themselves by default. And sure, people work up to 30 minutes of sitting or hours of sitting. And yeah, that's incredible and impressive. But the other way I like to encourage meditation is through mindful moments, is just pick a cue in your life, like every time you pass through this doorway, or set an alert, or every time you leave the bathroom. That's your reminder to tune into your breath, even if it's just for 1 minute, and even if it's just sitting at your desk.
I like that. Mindful moments. Mindfulness as a term has been preached a lot over the last, decade or so. It's become almost cliche, like every BuzzFeed article is talking about mindfulness now. Mm-hmm. But it's such an important, ancient principle, really. Yeah. Sometimes I find it difficult to help clients understand what we mean by mindfulness and mindful moments, because it's more than just like trying not to think. In fact, it's not that. It's not trying not to think. How do you kind of describe or teach mindfulness in a nutshell to people in the interest of integration?
Oh, it's a good question, one I really enjoy. And one tangent before I answer that is there's a ketamine researcher out of New York City who talks about ketamine as chemical mindfulness. And I've always found that very interesting because psychedelics, including ketamine, are tools to bring us into the here and now, to bring us into, the present moment where everything that's real and true exists. Like we spend so much of our lives thinking about what's coming next or rehashing the past, that wandering mind, that rumination, that anxious state is almost the opposite of mindfulness. So mindfulness, I would define as present moment awareness without judgment. Mm-hmm. Just returning to the here and now in a non-judgmental way and being present for how your life is unfolding.
Yeah. I've sometimes will call ketamine liquid perspective.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
And your present moment awareness is awareness of the data you're gathering through your senses, right? It's awareness of what you're seeing, smelling, tasting, feeling, hearing, all that stuff. But what's been more powerful for me personally and for some of my clients is awareness of the thinker. That there is a thinking mind in there. Maybe it's the default mode network, it's the monkey mind, the lizard brain. We got all these terms for it, right? But it seems to be responsible for a lot of our cognitive and emotional suffering.
Oh yeah.
This running commentary, it's got all these, distorted beliefs, maybe connected to trauma, maybe reinforced by society, but it seems to be the seat of our suffering in a lot of ways. And mindfulness, at the very least, is taking a step back and watching it. I don't know from what vantage point, right? Because I like to use Sam Harris's meditation app, Waking Up. Me too. And he's way into you need to look for the looker in order to discover that there is none, that you don't have a self, these really sort of trippy meditation exercises, but it's a really good induction into mindfulness, I think.
Yeah. So two things that makes me think of is one, that there is pain that's very real, but there's suffering that we have some control over. I like to define suffering as our emotional reaction to the pain, pain being that real sensory experience, but we can blow it up. We're very good at blowing up our pain to intense proportions by, fighting, resisting, freaking out over it. And meditative practices, mindfulness, like you said, is a way to address that emotional reaction to it. And the other thing is, I like to think about mindfulness as a three-legged stool. First we work on our attention, like honing our attention into something, like bringing the wandering mind gently back to what you intend to focus on. And two, sensory clarity. Like the other leg of the stool is just tuning into our life experience a little more, whether it's internally, externally. But without the third leg of the stool, the whole thing gets a little bit shaky. And that third leg is equanimity, or that word to describe what you're talking about of slipping into the observer state and watching it unfold instead of being caught up in it. Because if you increase your attention skills and hone your sensory clarity without the equanimity piece, that's intense. That'll blow up in your face. Mm-hmm. Almost overwhelming. That's why a lot of people say, I can't meditate.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that a lot more recently. And I don't know if that's an artifact of human beings not being accustomed to being alone with their own thoughts anymore. just because we have cell phones and we have YouTube algorithms and TikTok. Whatever mad scientist came up with the algorithm for TikTok, it'll keep you glued, man.
I mean, technology is in some ways eating our souls. Right. It's, it has some beautiful benefits. I'm sure society.
Some of our audience is listening on technology, right? So, I thank all the gods and whatever for technology, but it is. And I think it reminds me of another integration tactic that I'll sometimes recommend to people. And that is get away from your technology, go out into nature.
Yeah.
Be with Mother Earth.
I think that's huge is, look at your days and see if there are periods of time when you're not tethered to technology, like chained to your devices, your email. Like, it's really interesting to put your phone aside and go to the grocery store. It feels uncomfortable, but it's actually a liberating thing beyond that discomfort. Not saying don't bring your cell phone around, but like you said, take little holidays from it throughout the day. And that's another thing that someone's contemplative practice can ideally do, is give you a chance to unplug. I mean, even if you're using it as a timer on Insight Timer or something like that, just silencing the notifications, setting it out of your view so you can be present. And your nervous system is going to love that untethered state.
Once you get through the momentary detox.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. The dopamine detox of constantly chasing boredom away with the next scroll, or the next video, or the next comment. And I mean, there are podcasts and books and documentaries dedicated to the way social media pollutes our minds. But suffice it to say, when you're trying to integrate a psychedelic experience, you want to clear the channels a bit. To really listen to the intuitive healer inside of you. And difficult to listen and to hear its messages if it's constantly obscured by mindless entertainment or even really awesome entertainment. Getting out in nature, away from that technology, is a good way to clear up the signals, I think.
Yeah, nature has this power about it, even beyond the benefits of unplugging. There's something awe-inspiring and kind of energetically healing about getting out into nature and basking in that Mother Earth.
Right. I've heard evolutionary psychologists talk about it as, our brains evolved over millions of years in that context of what we're calling nature. We didn't evolve to spend a lot of time in artificially lit sheetrock boxes. But that's where we spend most of our time. And so there's something that for most of us that just feels right and settling and at home when we are out in the world we evolved, that we're basically made from.
Yeah, home's a good term for it.
Yeah.
And on something else you said about being tethered to our devices, and we've wired these habits of checking our phone, and it's a dopamine thing, right? You naturally pull out your phone, open social media, and see if there's a new like, a new comment, a new positive affirmation from someone, which in and of itself can be a beautiful thing. But that little spike of dopamine in this variable way keeps us going back for more. And it reminds me of this quote by, I think it's French philosopher Pascal, who said that all of our problems stem from our inability to sit still in a room alone.
I've heard that. Yeah. Remember, there are behavioral scientists, some of the smartest people and most energetic people, motivated people in the world, trying to come up with software to keep you looking at that thing. So if you're the rebellious type and you don't want to be manipulated, get untethered once in a while.
Yeah. And it's interesting to look at the statistics of how many times the average user opens their phone, checks their phone every day, which is in the hundreds and hundreds and climbing. In fact, wouldn't it be funny if we got out our phones right now and compared our screen time usage per day? A little shaming.
If by funny you mean like horrifying and embarrassing, then yeah. I wonder about, there's old people like you and me, well, more you than me, let's be honest, but I'm the bald one, but come on, who we adopted this technology, right? And I'm still pretty glued to it. What about our kids that are growing up? They're technology natives. They're not going to know what life was like before fractured attention like this.
Yeah, babies swiping iPads. It's like it's evolved into part of us, an extension of our cyborg new selves.
Right. Anyway, I digress a little bit. As far as integration goes, we have meditation, we have be in nature, clear the channels. How about tuning into the body? Nourishing it, feeding it, clearing those channels, but exercising it and moving it. You're a yoga practitioner, Reid. How important has movement and exercise been for your personal integration?
Yeah, well, that's another fun topic because I started out in the meditation world I caught the bug for meditation and really loved it. I was trying to share it with others, clients, loved ones, but I found that it was really hard to get people to sit still even for 3 minutes once or twice a day. It was really hard to do. Then I stumbled upon yoga and realized that there was something, this added kind of magic about involving the body in that process of tuning into oneself that it's almost like dangling a carrot in front of the meditation practice, but then more. It's like the body really is your vehicle to enlightenment in a way because it's our instrument of experience. It's how we feel things. It's how we navigate the world. So to come home to the body is to return to mindfulness. To tune into your body is to tune into your life. So it's hugely important in my life, and I can track my kind of not only mental wellness and physical well-being, but my kind of spiritual vitality too. Track it to how much I'm engaging in those practices, not only contemplative but embodiment practices.
Right. So, back to our point about using psychedelic experiences as a catalyst for change, as a launching off point, maybe pick one body-focused practice that you want to set a new goal about or make a change about, and use this opportunity to do it, whether that's move more, 5 minutes of yoga transitions or breath work or a walk, but do something body-oriented. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. And it doesn't have to be a big change. I like small incremental changes because they're much more likely to get done and stick under this idea of neurons that fire together, wire together, or it takes repetitive practice to bring something into your life in a lasting way. And if it's a 10-minute practice of something compared to 100-minute, the chances of it getting done and sticking are infinitely higher.
Right. When clients ask me, like, what kind of goals should I set? I usually say, whatever goals you think you will repeat. Like, whatever behavior you think is repeatable, that you are most likely to do, pick that. And it's usually something that's going to be low resistance, it's going to be attractive, it's going to be relevant. I think one of the best books, as an aside, about goal setting and habit change is James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. Clear's not he's not a mental health professional, but his email is really good too. If you subscribe to his email newsletter, tons of pithy wisdom. But he talks a lot about those principles in Atomic Habits.
Yeah, I like that book. There's another author who talks about hacking these reward loops named Judson Brewer. He's a psychiatrist out of the Boston area, and does a lot of research on mindfulness for things like smoking cessation, binge eating disorder, but really we are what we repeatedly do. We're the sum total of our habits, and psychedelics give us a chance to consciously direct that. So neurons can fire together and wire together in a way that we actually would like to see in our
Right.
lives.
Yeah, wouldn't you love to dictate the way those neurons wire together?
Yeah, and it takes time. Like integration requires patience and persistence, and that expectation piece you mentioned earlier, I think, is crucial in bringing these habits into real life. Because how long does it take to form a habit? Lots of answers to that question, but it's usually several weeks or more.
Right. So I wanted to talk about for those folks for whom their psychedelic experience was very destabilizing. It was either because it just sort of flipped their perspective up on its head, or it was so bizarre they don't really know quite what to make of it. We're hoping that they're in therapy, right? We're providing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and that they can talk to a therapist or a guide or a trusted loved one at least about the experience. But for integration for people who have an experience like that, I think not being alone in that experience or to make sense of that experience is really important.
Yeah, and that's worth talking about with your clinician, therapist, guide, support network before going into the psychedelic experience, because you want to identify those people who you can really open up to and share all this wild, weird, wonderful stuff without the fear we might have of judgment or shame or someone reacting in a less encouraging and positive way, or not understanding what we've set out to do. Because this does contain a lot of kind of mystical content that not everyone is accustomed to talking about, and it does healing can be disruptive as well to the regular ways you might have interacted with people in your life in the past.
Right. You might share this experience in a well-meaning way with a loved one who has no context for something like this, and they could react, even if it was from a good place for them, they could react really poorly. So you want to be discerning about who you share these experiences with, either somebody who's really good at holding space in a non-judgmental way, or somebody who's had psychedelic experiences of their own.
Yeah, and after ayahuasca retreat work, we would have participants pair up in a buddy system and check in with each other in addition to their therapy, in addition to the groups we were doing, and in addition to identifying those trusted loved ones to lean on as well, because it's so important, that aspect of community and not feeling alone in this. There's also this concept of unconscious contracts that I think is relevant along those lines, where healing can be disruptive. If you have one spouse in a partnership who goes off and does some psychedelic therapy personal work and comes back, and all of a sudden they just show up differently in life and in their relationship, and the things they're consciously working on, if they haven't prepped their partner or involved them in the education, the expectations, the plan, then that can be extra difficult, if not an obstacle that people can crash into.
Yeah, open communication about this with loved ones, I think, with the trusted, close loved ones, is really important to set the proper stage.
Yeah, and that's something the therapist can help with. How to approach that in a soft startup kind of way is, listen, like, I'm working on this, and I would love your support with it, instead of, no, I don't do that anymore. That could be received in a very different way.
Right. Yeah. Grandmother ayahuasca told me I'm not allowed to do that anymore. And like, what the hell are you talking about?
We do this together.
Yeah. Exactly. There's another integration practice that's often recommended by therapists, and that's journaling. And I'm not talking about Dear Diary, this was my day kind of journaling. Specific to your intention, specific to the things you're trying to explore and change, but especially if you're not talking to other people like we just recommended you do, at least talk to yourself.
Yeah.
At least write it out. and explore what was meaningful about this. What am I still trying to understand about this? What should I do next about this? And you can do a fun spin on this is dream journaling. Some people have very vivid, interesting dreams after psychedelic experiences, sometimes directly related to their experiences, if not like reruns of their experiences. So dream journaling can also be a fun exercise.
Yeah, we write so our brains don't explode, I'll sometimes say. But it really is a way of letting some of that energy out, laying it out there for us to help organize and make sense of. Like a psychedelic experience can be wild, with so many things coming at you that may not make sense, but journaling is such a powerful way to draw insights from that you can work on in your integration plan in day-to-day life and revisit over and over.
Exactly. And if you're working with a therapist, what you do for integration might follow that therapist's particular approach to therapy. So for the clinicians listening to the podcast, as it stands now, there isn't a certain kind of psychotherapy that we offer in conjunction with psychedelic medicine. The MAPS folks, I think, deliberately left it pretty open when they described what type of therapy is being used for the MDMA trials right now. They didn't pick like it is IFS or it is somatic experiencing or it is acceptance and commitment therapy. It certainly has some common factors, flavors to it. It's open-ended. It's focused on the inner healing intelligence. It's holding space. But I imagine as this field grows and develops, we're going to find different applications combined with different psychedelic medicines. And that's going to dictate at least somewhat the work you do post-psychedelic experience, whether you're working with parts or whether you're challenging dysfunctional beliefs or whether you're focusing on mindfulness or you're doing EMDR or something like that.
And in the MAPS therapist training and manual, there's not a formal, say, internal family systems parts approach, but like you said, it's heavily informed by that and says to, if someone's going into parts work, go there with them. It's also important not to impose your values, even if you have, as a clinician, even if you have a certain therapy inclination, which we all do, making sure we're honoring that inner healing intelligence of the individual and getting out of the way of the medicine so they can heal themselves and grow themselves.
And I wonder, in 20 years from now, when a lot more research is going to be done about psychotherapy and psychedelics, if the more structured approaches aren't going to find their way in. Because the pioneers are very much of that persuasion, right? Of the trust, the inner healing intelligence, kind of the client-centered Rogerian approach of self-actualization occurring if the environment is right. If that unconditional positive regard and loving environment is set, the person will naturally know what to do. Their inner healer will guide them. And it's an approach that I subscribe to as a therapist, but it's not the only approach to change. It might be the approach that pairs best with psychedelics. It might not. This is more just me thinking out loud about the science. I'll be curious to see where it goes.
Yeah, and the way I see it is that is emerging as the foundation of it all. Like these principles of working with the inner healer, maybe doing parts work in some way with individuals where that's an important part of their journey. But I do think that for certain conditions, that these therapies, like you suggested, certain therapies will emerge and more studies will point towards specific ways of working with and integrating specific conditions, but with that flexible approach of kind of honoring the individual journey and their healing potential.
Yeah, it seems to me that that's got to be like a required aspect of psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, regardless of your theoretical orientation, is the sovereignty of the individual's journey.
Yeah, because I do think we're there as clinicians to help remove obstacles, to help create or facilitate the optimal conditions for healing to occur, like making sure there's attention paid to the set and setting and helping the individual find the right intention for them and helping them figure out the right intention plan and remember to keep working on it.
I think, you said remove obstacles, and it reminded me of another important strategy for integration, and that is helping the client think about what obstacles will be present after I come back to the world that might prevent me from integrating, that might prevent me from living my life more in accord with this new self that I've discovered on psychedelics. So helping them identify what potential obstacles might exist and then create strategies for overcoming them. Yeah,
that's one of my two favorite integration questions or prompts for someone coming out of a psychedelic journey is one, how might you get in your own way? Like you're saying, just to identify that in advance and prepare so you can navigate around it. And then two, what's one thing, at least one thing you can do in the next day or two to support your integration and making sure, baby steps, like there is something that's going to be done in the direction of your goals and hopes and dreams and where you are hoping to go.
Right. So I think there's probably an infinite number perhaps, of strategies and things you could do to help integrate a psychedelic experience. Sometimes if you want to get really broad, I guess you could make the argument that anything you do that is pro mental health is going to be good for psychedelic integration. I think you could make that argument. Maybe not anything.
Yeah, just putting everything through that litmus test of, does it kind of raise my consciousness? Does it move me towards that state of wholeness that we're all after? Does it open my heart? Does it open me up to life more rather than constricting or closing or fearing or running from life?
Yeah. Is it loving? Is it compassionate? Is it curious? And if it's not those things, if it's judgmental, shaming, harmful, those are good signposts, I guess.
Yeah.
Any other ideas about integration, Reid, that we haven't covered?
I think we've run the spectrum pretty well, and like you said, there's an infinite number of integration practices, but just the reminder that integration is where the true transformation lies, is that the medicine is just, it opens the door.
Yeah, keep chopping that water and carrying that wood.
Chop the water up.
Chop it up. All right. Thanks, Reid.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers is brought to you by Novamind, a mental health company that specializes in psychedelic medicine and research. You can learn more about Novamind's mission to increase access to legal, safe, and evidence-based psychedelic medicine at novamind.ca. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. This will help us get into the ears and faces of more people and help us put wind in the sails of the psychedelic medicine renaissance. Thanks for listening.